Welcome everybody at this week's Spark. We are privileged to have Dr. Shanie Boshoff talking to us about, do you have enough empathy? Thank you, Shanie.
So perhaps the question is, does the other person perceive you to have enough or too little empathy? So you might consider yourself to be someone who's very emphatic. You have a heart, you care for people, especially when they have misfortunes. Or on the other hand, perhaps you may feel that you do not have enough empathy, that you are too task-orientated and don't really worry about the emotions of others. And that might make you feel a little bit guilty. So where do you find yourself if you look at your amount of empathy? So I just used a quick self-test, and please apply to yourselves. If you look at empathy as a strength and you look at managing empathy and mismanaging empathy, where would you find yourself? Would it be well managed, like emotional supporter? Would you lift the emotional intelligence of the group or the team? Will people trust you with their emotions? Or on the other hand, if it's mismanaged, would you be too emotionally involved? Would there be people pleasing? Would you have a bleeding heart? Would you be paralyzed by the emotions of others? So somewhere on that continuum, you find yourself. And it will also depend on there could be barriers that you will have for not feeling any specific empathy. And the barriers could be the way in which you were raised. It could be the value that was placed on emotions while you were brought up. It could be the message that you are receiving about values. It might be that you are feeling overwhelmed when emotions come into place, especially those of others. So there's some good news and no bad news. Empathy isn't something that you either have or don't have. You have a higher degree and a lesser degree, but you do have empathy. And the second thing is, contrary to popular belief, research has actually shown that you can develop the skill of empathy. Some of us who know something about strengths also know if you do not have the strength of empathy in your first 10 strengths, you are able to use your other strengths to get to the same result as the strength of empathy. But let's dive a little bit deeper into empathy in today's Spark, because it is a little bit more complex than I in the beginning actually thought. There seems to be two common misconceptions about empathy. The first one is that there is only one kind of empathy, and secondly, that you cannot have enough empathy. More is better. But let's start at the beginning to see what is empathy. So empathy is the ability to see something from someone else's perspective and then to feel their emotion. So it's that whole thing of putting yourself into someone else's shoes. And that might lead to compassion so that you do something about that. And that might even lead to a broader input on a broader input on a different level, where you actually want to expand that feeling and contribute to help in another way. So just having an example, you're coming home from work, you had a good day, but when you get home, your partner is ill, and you feel that distress with you, and you are very worried about that. That is empathy. It might be that a friend have a discussion with you, gets home after work, after they had a fight at work or a fallout at work, and they share their experience, and you understand that they can be frustrated, and you understand that they just need some emotional space to voice their opinion and their emotions. But empathy isn't always about hardships. It's also about sharing the excitement and the amusement and the fulfilling of dreams. So the moment that you then share that experience, it takes your relationship to a deeper level. And feeling that those emotions are also empathy. But empathy can also extend to people that you do not know well or not know at all. If you are in a social situation and someone is standing somewhere all alone and you go to them and start speaking because you are feeling that they are being isolated. That's also empathy. It could also mean that you are feeling empathy with a situation on the other side of the world, like the Ukraine war, and where you are donating money to help relieve that specific situation. That's also empathy. So just to get this out of the way, we seem to use the words empathy and sympathy interchangeably. And there's a whole lot of explanations for that. But how I understand it, very oversimplified, is sympathy is when you don't involve sharing someone else's feelings, where you aren't involved in sharing their pain. So that seems to be the core element for me. For example, if your friend experienced some kind of bereavement, if you're sympathetic, you will understand why they feel sad and that they are grieving. And you will really feel sorry for their loss. That's sympathy. But empathy comes in if you can actually feel the grief that they are going through. So it's a kind of a degree, but it's some kind of a focus shift as well. So there are two broad kinds of empathy. There actually are 5, but let's simplify and keep it to 2. The one is cognitive and the one is emotional. So the cognitive empathy is where you take another person's perspective, where you imagine what feelings and emotions they are having, and when you are understanding their feelings. Versus emotional empathy is where you are starting to share the experience because you are feeling distress because of the other person's pain and you are experiencing a willingness to help. So let's make it practical. So if someone says, my grandmother died and have just died and we are very close, and then starts to cry, the cognitive empathy would be, I'm sorry. I know that you're sad and that you are going through a tough time and it's hard. So nothing wrong with that. But then the emotional empathy response would be, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandmother. I know you miss her and I'm here for you. So you can see that we can all react in a cognitive empathy way. Nothing wrong with that. Then we can react in an emotional way, empathetic way. That's also not wrong. But the best price would be to react in a compassionate empathy. And that is where you combine the understanding with the feeling and the emotional side. And that is most desirable because that will actually bring you to the point where you want to help. Question is, can you have too much empathy? Of course you can. And that will come out when you become imbalanced, so overwhelmed with the emotions that you cannot distance yourself. You cannot really contribute to the situation or make it better. So just 5 tips on how to increase your empathy. Nothing new, but let's go through them quickly. Put aside your viewpoints. So we often don't realize how much our experiences and our beliefs influence how we perceive people and situations. So slowing down, stepping into someone else's shoes, to use your imagination, because sometimes you don't experience it in the same way, but use your imagination to try and understand that. The one that we say in every spark, listen with intent. The other one is be curious, because you aren't in their shoes. You aren't really that person. Ask questions. How will you experience this? Explain to me. Help me to understand what you are feeling right now. And then don't try to fix. Don't try to make them feel better. Share and walk beside them. And that would be empathy.